According to Muhammad, in a revelation he claimed to have received from God, the sun sets in a pool of murky water. Now, the reason this is important is because Muslims, as their main argument for Islam nowadays, appeal to scientific accuracy, the amazing scientific accuracy of the Quran. And they usually don't bother to show people how the Quran is scientifically accurate. They walk up to people and tell people that, right? Because people in the West have a pretty high regard for science. And so Muslims will come along and say, you see this book? It's filled with amazing scientific accuracies that no one could have known. No one could have known in Muhammad's time. No one knew them for centuries. No one knew them for centuries after Muhammad's time. It's only today that we are fully coming to grasp the amazing scientific insights in this book. And people convert based on hearing that, not realizing, wow, maybe I should actually bother to read the book and see what it says on various scientific topics to see whether this claim is true before I go ahead and convert to a religion. Well, I actually don't like nitpicking on every little scientific problem we might point out in the Quran, unless the argument is being made against me that this book is confirmed by science. Then we have to go through the claims it makes. But I want to address one right now that is very important because it's not something Muslims can reinterpret. Right? There are passages in the Quran that seem to be saying something obviously false. And a Muslim will want to say, well, what that really means is something completely different from what it says in Allah's perfectly clear word. Allah brags over and over again in the Quran that His word is perfectly clear. Muslims find something that's obviously false, and so they say, what He really meant was something totally different. And here we have a passage that is so obviously wrong that Muslims try to reinterpret it in our day. The problem is Muhammad himself gives the interpretation. And according to Islam, Sam, who is a greater interpreter of the Quran than Muhammad himself?
Actually, Muhammad is also called the walking Quran. Mm-hmm. He actually lives and breathes the Quran, so there is no greater authority on earth to explain the Quran than Muhammad.
So if Muhammad says this is what the Quran means, does a Muslim get to say, well, Muhammad's obviously wrong, I'm going to interpret it this way?
Unless they think that they're a prophet of a higher status than Muhammad, there is no way you can deny the words of Muhammad. Now, they may say that the narration itself is weak, or that the narration falsely attributes words to Muhammad, but we know they can't even appeal to that argument because what you're about to quote is deemed sahih, meaning sound, without any error or defect in its chain of transmission. So if you're going to call into question this so-called sound narration, then you're going to have to call into question the entire corpus of the hadith literature.
In which case, we don't know anything about Islam.
Exactly.
We don't know anything about Islam. We don't know anything about the formation of the Quran if you start throwing out
Precisely.
the narrations that describe how the Quran was formed. All right, well, let's look at the passage. This is chapter 18, verses 83 through 86 of the Quran. And they ask you about Dhul-Qarnayn. Many Muslims say this is referring to Alexander the Great, but whoever it refers to, the same situation applies. And they ask you about Dhul-Qarnayn. Say, I shall recite to you something of his story. Verily, we established him in the earth. This is Allah speaking. Verily, we established him in the earth, and we gave him the means of everything. So he followed away, until when he reached the setting place of the sun, he found it setting in a spring of black, muddy, or hot water, and he found near it a people. Notice what this is saying. He reached the setting place of the sun. So not only is there a setting place of the sun, you can actually get there. If you travel far enough, you can get to the place where the sun sets. There is a place where the sun sets. And where is this place? He found it setting in a spring of black, muddy, or hot water. And not only that, he found near it a people. So we have a couple of things here in this passage. One, there's a place where the sun sets. Two, Dhul-Qarnayn, or Alexander the Great, gets to this place, and there are people who live there. Now, Sam, I don't know about you, but they taught me in science class that the sun is much bigger than the earth. Could the sun possibly set in a pool of water here on earth? And could there be people who live there? Every day the sun goes and sets in this pool, and they live right beside it. They're fine, right?
To even get that close to the sun is to be, torched.
Incinerated, yeah.
You got it, man.
Instantly.
There's no way, impossible.
Now, Muslims Muslims want to reinterpret this passage, right? And there's a lot here. They have to say that there is no setting place of the sun. He obviously didn't get there, and there certainly aren't people who are living there. So they try rather desperately, may I add, to say what this is talking about is Dhul-Qarnayn coming to some body of water, and he sees a reflection of the sun in the pool. And so from his perspective, it looks like the sun is sitting in a pool. And that's all this passage is saying. This passage doesn't say he found a pool and he saw a reflection of the sun in the pool. He found the setting place of the sun, found it going down into a muddy pool. But assuming Muslims want to reinterpret this, you have to deal with Muhammad himself, because Muhammad also explains where the sun goes. And this part has nothing to do with Dhul-Qarnayn. This is Muhammad telling one of his companions where the sun goes. It's not, Alexander the Great is looking at a pool or something like that. Got nothing to do with this passage. Exactly. So let's see what Muhammad says. Sunan Abu Dawud, number 3991. This, again, as Sam pointed out, is classified as Sahih. Abu Dar said, I was sitting behind the apostle of Allah, who was riding a donkey while the sun was setting. He asked, do you know where this sets? I replied, Allah and his apostle know best. He said, it sets in a spring of warm water. Nothing about Alexander the Great.
Nothing allegorical.
Nothing about a reflection. Nothing about a story. This is Muhammad talks to one of his companions. You know where that sun's going? I don't know. You know. You're the prophet. It's going to set in a pool. There's no reflection involved here. This is Muhammad telling his companions where the sun's going.
Abu Dar said, I was sitting behind the apostle of Allah, who was riding a donkey while the sun was setting. He asked, do you know where this sets? I replied, Allah and his apostle know best. He said, it sets in a spring of warm water. It sets in a spring of warm water. Where does the sun set? According to Muhammad, it sets in a pool of water. So is there a place where the sun sets? Sure there is. Could we reach this place if we traveled far enough? No reason we couldn't. Bravo. Thank you. Bravo. Bravo. Thank you. Bravo.
Unfortunately for David Wood, again, this hadith is not mentioned in any revised edition version of Sunan Abu Dawud collection, as Book 30 ends by hadith 3990, and Book 31 starts with hadith 3998. That is because hadith 3991 was classified to be shaz, or isolated, and this hadith is rejected and not accepted. And moreover, this hadith was not mentioned in any commentary by any Muslim scholar, especially Ibn Kathir, on his complete commentary on the verse, 1886. While it is known that it is especially popular because it uses hadith to explain each verse and chapter of the Quran.
In this Sahih narration from one of Islam's most trusted collections of ahadith,
Again, it is 100% false. As it is known, Sunan Abu Dawud contained some weak hadith, some of which he pointed out, others which he did not. And now, after we have exposed all David Wood lies against the Quran and verse 1886, and also how did he misquote Dr. Zakir, let's check what really the Quran teaches us about the sun, and its motion and position. The noble Quran is so clear that all heavenly bodies orbiting, the moon goes around the earth, and the earth orbits the sun, and even the sun orbits around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And that is mentioned in many various verses in the noble Quran. Just let's see two positions from two different chapters of the Quran.
وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون.
And it is He who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon. All heavenly bodies in an orbit are swimming.
لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون.
It is not allowable for the sun to reach the moon, nor does the night overtake the day, but each in an orbit is swimming.
And, if we return to any authentic commentary on the Quran, we read as in Tafsir ibn Abbas, as a commentary on verse 2133.
And He it is who created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. He made the sun and the moon subservient. They float, each in an orbit, each one of them rotate around its orbit.
And, if we return to Tafsir al-Jalalain, as a commentary on verse 3640.
The sun, the moon, and the stars, of these is in an orbit, swimming, moving. These celestial bodies are being treated as though they were rational beings.
Miraculously, And after 1,400 years of Quran being inspired, we read in many modern scientific sources such as NASA and Universe Today, what 100% confirms the noble Quran, that astronomers have calculated that it takes the sun 226 million years to completely orbit around the center of the Milky Way.
And it is He who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon. All heavenly bodies in an orbit are swimming.
And it talks to us in here about the stars. It talks about the moon and the sun and the earth and everything that Allah created, and describes them in detail and tells us that the earth is doing what? Kawi. Turning. The same thing like when you make a turban, Kawi. Turning. The earth is turning, and nobody believed that back then, because you don't feel the earth turning, do you? So we assumed that the earth was the center of the universe and that the sun was going around us, what we thought. But it mentions that even the sun is in orbit. The earth is in orbit. How could the sun be in an orbit? But guess what we found out? It's in an orbit. The sun has an orbit. It's not being still. And the moon is going, the earth is going around the sun the same way the moon is going around the earth. All of it's moving, swimming. And Allah uses this, swimming. Who is telling us this? The Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of the world.
You know, the question of the sun, there's a hadith in which the Prophet describes the sun, after it sets, it goes and prostrates before the throne of God. And this, of course, in the early 20th century caused all this anxiety. Yet you look at I give examples of lots of pre-modern Muslim scholars who, they all knew the hadith wasn't literally true. They knew that the sun didn't literally go and prostrate before the throne of God, because they know that the sun is always up, because they knew about prayer times. They knew if you went really far north, the sun was always up, and they knew that at different places the sun was rising and setting at different times. So it was always figurative. And yet, when it comes time to, this confrontation with European modernity, this becomes a big crisis. And there's the tradition is forgotten, and it's overwhelmed by this sense of crisis and inferiority.
Bravo.